sectors. It's my pleasure to welcome Matiullah Obaidi, who's the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of Ghazanfar Bank in Kabul. He's going to give us some insights from the perspective in Afghanistan. He had been hoping to join us here, but unfortunately at the end wasn't able to due to visa issues. But you're very welcome, Matiullah. We're looking forward to hearing the situation in Afghanistan. And the other thing for me to say is that Matiullah is a student on our Chartered Banker MBA. Welcome, Matiullah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me to this event. I'm very grateful from Bangor University and for giving me the chance to present Afghanistan from perspective of geographical insights and on how to deliver the financial services in challenging times during COVID-19, and especially the event which happened in the country, which was a takeover of a government by Islamic Emirates, and what issues and what opportunities we have right now, and what are the differences and compared to the past, and what will be the future of banking sector. We will discuss this in our conversation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Matiullah. Could we have the next slide, please? So the format, colleagues who are listening to this recording, is that you have the words on the screen. Matiullah will read them. They're only relatively short. Then, as appropriate, he and I will engage in a brief discussion about some of the items there, and then we'll move forward. So if you'd like to just take us through this this slide, Matiullah, and then you and I'll have a chat about it afterwards.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Starting with the background information, Afghanistan has faced an unprecedented challenge since February 2020, when the first record of COVID-19 case has been registered in Herat province of the country. The COVID-19 outbreak, the subsequent restriction measure pushed the economy of the country into recession. The economic activities began to slow down in early 2020 and exacerbated further when Afghan government imposed nationwide lockdown in March. In an attempt to contain the outbreak, the decline trend of economic activities in the country, which started in early 2020, remained persistent throughout the second quarter, with the worst impact on the livelihoods of vulnerable and poor population of the country, resulting unprecedented crisis and unemployment and poverty in the country in Afghanistan.
Okay, thanks for that setting of the scene, Matiullah. There we see many things which are in common with the rest of the world, shall we call it. We were all unaware of COVID in 2019, then early 2020 it came and shocked us all, and of course most of our countries went into exactly the same experience as Afghanistan, with a nationwide lockdown which did have an impact on economic activity. You're right to note the impact on the vulnerable and poor population, and I know that in a later slide you're going to talk about the bank's involvement in its social obligations to helping with humanitarian aid. So the next slide, please.
Thank you. So as we are going to discuss in particular as Ghazanfar Bank as an example, so here we will have a short introduction with the bank. Ghazanfar Bank is a full-fledged commercial bank which licensed by Central Bank of Afghanistan, commenced its operation in March 2009. The shareholder of the bank belongs to one of the leading business groups in Afghanistan. Ghazanfar Group was established on 1910 in Afghanistan, retaining more than 250 million US dollar worth of assets in the country and more than 2,500 employees. The group involved in various sectors such as energy generation, infrastructure development, logistics, trading, supply chain, and of course banking. Ghazanfar Bank currently provides numerous financial services under both conventional and Islamic banking windows.
I have to say, those who are listening to this presentation and watching it, that when we were preparing it, I was pleasantly surprised when the date of 1910 came up. So the company has a reasonably long history. Was it always under the name Ghazanfar Group?
Yes.
Okay, so the brand is a known brand, and of course, as we all know, it often helps in terms of brand extension. If you're going and you have an unknown brand, people, well, they have no way of understanding anything about you. But at least by the time that Ghazanfar Bank was set up in 2009, it had almost a century, 100 years of activity, and would be known by the population in that part of the world. Let me just ask one question there, Matiullah. You say that Ghazanfar Bank provides numerous financial services under both conventional and Islamic banking. Is it a requirement of any license that you hold from the central bank that you must do both? Could you do conventional banking without Islamic banking, or Islamic without conventional, or is it a business decision to do both?
Thank you so much, Stephen. Actually, we need to have the commercial license from Central Bank of Afghanistan, and we have permission from Central Bank to operate under both Islamic and conventional banking. Actually, the conventional is a full-fledged conventional banking, and in Islamic we have a window. Through window, we are providing Islamic financial services to the population of country, since more than 99% of population of the country is consists of Muslims. So therefore, it is a need in the country to have Islamic banking operations or services.
Okay, so that it makes commercial sense with 99% of the population. And we'll return in a couple of slides' time, not solely to Islamic banking, but to talking about other segments in Afghanistan. Next slide, please.
Thank you. Coming to the banking sector performance and measures which have been taken during the COVID-19 pandemic. Though the COVID-19 squeezed most of the areas in Afghanistan, the economy was impacted disparately, and the banking sector, unlike the other sectors, performed well, regardless of COVID-19 pandemic. The main financial indicators such as total asset, including cash involved and claims on debt, which is the Afghanistan Bank, Central Bank of Afghanistan. Investment in bonds, deposits, financial capitals increased, while loan and interbank claims had decreased. The banking sector was profitable, though the profit decreased in December 2019, and the loan quality remained vulnerable.
Okay, so I think in that situation, that would not be in some respects different to other parts of the world, where particularly the loan quality was poor, was weak, because whether it be persons taking out individual loans, perhaps under Islamic banking conditions, or companies taking out loans, people were stressed. And I think that leads into the next sentence about providing support.
Thank you. I think.
Sorry, just back a slide to the. There we are. In the said circumstances, yeah.
Yeah. So going on, in said some circumstances, Ghazanfar Bank took an initiative, and as a leading bank in the industry, apart from providing online financial services, which is important at the time of COVID, especially. The bank has introduced a new loan product by the name of Fight Against COVID-19 under Islamic Murabaha and conventional banking term loan and demand loan. The target audience for mentioned product was private health sectors and other businesses having a proper plan for working to fight against COVID-19, but not limited to producers of medicine or medical equipment and any item held in health and hygiene and other importers or other companies or corporations which were working in health and hygienic areas.
Okay, so I think there are two examples there in terms of the bank taking an initiative. We may classify that as social responsibility, providing financial services and helping particularly to fight against COVID for some particular sectors. The private health sector and other businesses having a proper plan to fight COVID. Of course, in the early days, in most parts of the world, companies, governments didn't know how to actually fight COVID and therefore putting together a plan. I remember when the university here closed for March 2020, I expected I would be working from home for 2 weeks. And of course, that was the expectation, but it turned out to be nearly 2 years. So planning in these conditions, very difficult for individuals and businesses, and therefore providing loans against plans equally challenging. A focus there on a sector which is important to fighting COVID at the societal level, health, hygiene and their importers. The next slide, please.
One thing, if I may, one point I want to add here, the new products and services which have been provided by financial institutions on a global basis, they had vulnerability since they were new and they were introduced new to the financial industry. So the criminals also wanted to exploit this situation. So in here as well, the bank and central bank, thanks to the Central Bank of Afghanistan and financial intelligence unit, which requested and made it mandatory for the banks to perform AML safety risk assessment and take necessary measures to mitigate those risks. So it helped allow the bank to not be exploited by financial criminals. Coming to the next slide, the collapse of government and new challenge for a struggling economy of Afghanistan. While the COVID-19 shock and its impact on the developing economy of Afghanistan were still there, and the economy was not recovered fully, a new major shock or a new major changes have been happened in the country since the U.S. Troops withdrawal and the Islamic Emirate takeover of Afghanistan in August 2021. The country has endured a deep and increasing deeply humanitarian crisis, revoking the central bank credentials, notably the US and other governments, and as well as international organizations such as World Bank Group also revoked the credential of Afghan Central Bank to interact with the international banking system and international financial institutions such as World Bank, IMF, ADB, and others. And many other countries also didn't want to take this risk, so they also either stopped or suspended their relationship for a certain time. The people rushed to the bank and wanted to withdraw their money, and debtors ran to bankruptcy and could not pay their installments. The US imposed sanction and freeze the foreign reserve of the central bank.
Well, Matiullah, thank you so much for that interesting and very honest description of the change that occurred on top of COVID, change upon change. And I know that many of the people watching this and listening will be very interested by that and sympathetic to it. Before you talked about this slide, you also mentioned that a trend which we have seen in many parts of the world in the financial services system has been an increase in criminal activity. Leading to fraud or attempted fraud by financial criminals. In passing, I'll mention here that Bangor Business School is introducing a new MBA in financial crime and compliance, partly to tackle that, although we were talking about it before. And the influence of external agencies is clear in what you talk about here. where the Afghan central bank's credentials were revoked, and making it difficult for individuals to move money around and to transfer it in and out of the country. And it would be a natural pattern of behaviour for people to rush and withdraw money as much as they could so that they felt comfortable with where it is. Before we move on from this slide, we talked a little earlier about, I think you mentioned, 99% of the population followed Islamic religion and culture, hence it made sense to have Islamic banking as one of your products in the portfolio. I know, looking at your website, Ghazanfar Bank, that you actually have a couple of other segments that you focus on, and many of these segments are those that are difficult in other parts of the world. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about, there's a long history in the UK and around the world that says small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, often find it difficult to convince banks to give them loans. They're small, it's in the name, they don't have many resources, and therefore in the past, certainly in the UK, the owners of these businesses have had to pledge their assets, including their family estates and assets and homes, in order to get a loan. Another sector, another segment of the population that sometimes finds difficulty accessing financial services is the female population, banking particularly to serve women customers. And given the change and the introduction of technology-based banking that you talked about on a previous slide, I wondered if there's anything you could say about how that might help online financial services you talked about, whether that particularly might help people who can't come to the bank for a variety of reasons, COVID, and the SME sector and banking with female customers.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's really a good question. Starting from SMEs, Ghazanfar Bank has a dedicated segment for SME, small and medium enterprises, and we also have our partners such as ACGF, Afghan Credit Guarantee, and as well as other international partners which are working with us, and they have provided with grantee scheme, granting the loan which are provided to SME sector. So even if the SMEs are going to default by any chance, the loan is already granted. So we have a strong strength in that area, and we have been closely working with the SME sector, and we have provided millions of dollars loan in dollar currency and as well as in local currency to support the SME sector. And coming to the women in banking, I am pleased to say that Ghazanfar Bank has been selected as bank of choice for women, and at the same time we have a special loan product for women with lower interest rate and compared to other loans in corporate or SME. So we have facilitated a lot for women in order to access the financial system, which they obviously find difficulty, especially in this region. And coming to the digital banking platform, fortunately in 2019, Ghazanfar Bank has implemented the Oracle or FlaxCube and OBDX module as well, through which our customers are able, and we enabled our customers to have access for variety of service on online basis, starting from opening account, requesting for loan, transferring local currency, domestic payments and international payments, and many more. So this is the competitive advantage that we have, and at the same time the support which we could provide to the society, especially on COVID pandemic.
Great, thanks for that additional insight. Next slide, please.
Thank you. how banks manage their operation. Actually, there was lots of speculation that financial sector may not survive the shock of change in government, since many areas they have there were new restrictions and so on. Starting with a view that over 12 private, public, and foreign banks are operating in the country, and there were tough competition in the market, and at the same time, with respect to operations, the bank performed really well, beyond the expectation and beyond the speculations of international organizations and associations. Thanks to Central Bank of Afghanistan for taking on-time decision for putting limit for withdrawals of fund from the banks, which further helped the banks to manage their liquidity. At the same time, they have provided a monetary period of 1 year for the banks for provisioning of bad debts, which further help the financial institution to not go undercapitalized. And at the same time, since we are talking regarding managing the situation of COVID-19 and after COVID-19, the change in government, we are going to set an example, the Ghazanfar Bank, and we are going to further discuss specifically that how the bank managed the situation.
Great. Just to pick up on 2 points there, the central bank intervention limiting withdrawals from banks are probably not very popular with customers who would have preferred to take most of it out and keep it safe at home, but nevertheless needed to keep bank liquidity. And then also recognizing the problems of bad loans and provisioning for 1 year. But we'd like to hear now about Ghazanfar Bank itself on the next slide, please.
Thank you. Before collapse of the government, the management of bank studied the situation and speculated rightly that in case there will be a political change, especially takeover of government, there will be obviously a run to the bank. When the government collapsed, the people had, as it was expected, they started to run to the bank, but thanks to on-time decision of the management, which they already increased their high liquid asset, and the bank didn't have any issue at all for provisioning of cash to the customers. At the same time, we have initiated different meetings with DAP, Central Bank of Afghanistan, international organization, and other interested parties or stakeholders, and to set a strategy which further help the bank, and applying those strategies had a really good result out of it. Further, there was more improvement, and fortunately, the U.S. government, a special thanks to the OFAC for announcing 5 general licenses, which allowed Afghanistan and banking sector to interact with the international community, and once again start its operation on international financial system and profile international inward and outward remittances for import and export purposes, receiving funds for humanitarian aid purposes, and many more.
Yes, I think you're demonstrating there the importance of one, action promptly and in advance by individual banks management, Ghazanfar Bank in particular, in the example we're talking about, but also the other influences, the international institutions, because as well as supporting SMEs to serve the domestic population in Afghanistan, there'll be a need for import and export, not least of which for humanitarian aid. The next slide continues a little more on how Ghazanfar Bank managed the situation, please.
Thank you, Stephen. Through its strong corresponding banking relationship with different banks and on a global basis, the bank started sending and receipt of international remittances for different purposes, which are allowed by general licenses. And in light of OFAC FATF and other international bodies and sanction regimes such as United Nations and as well as European Union sanction regime, we have resumed this operation and enabled our customers for different purposes, which really helped the economy of Afghanistan, providing these facilities. Because if Afghanistan is an import-dependent country, so in case the banks are not able to transfer funds abroad, the country will face a huge inflation and increase in prices. So this helped the economy to survive. And at the same time, the bank strengthened its network via its branches and agents, which enabled the bank to access all 34 provinces of the country and provide financial services on countrywide basis. It's worth mentioning that even before collapse of previous government, the bank didn't have presence on all over the country. So this was a new achievement and even a better improvement which Ghazanfar Bank had. Also, the bank took part in distribution of humanitarian aid in all around the country and supported international NGOs in receiving and distributing the fund to the poor society or needy people in all around the country, including in remote areas. We also had such cases where the fund distribution took place on door-to-door basis. So this was also one of the major services or delivering the best financial services to the community.
Thanks, and it's particularly interesting that despite the challenges, COVID, political change, you've been able to strengthen it to all 34 provinces, something which even the government bank historically hadn't managed to achieve. Doing those things which are serving society whilst also, of course, having a commercial focus. And the final slide is a conclusion. The next slide, please.
Coming to conclusion, while the COVID-19 had minimum impact on banking sector, and even there were certain improvement in banking industry in the country, whereas the collapse of government had undeniable impacts on the financial sector of the country. Though the banking sector of Afghanistan had performed very well, and unlike the prediction, they survived and continued their operation in the country. Some banks like Ghazanfar Bank have even strengthened their network and provided various sort of financial services to their customers. Predicting the future of financial institution and what will the provision of financial services in Afghanistan look like in future is hard, as we know that there could be different scenarios, and under each of these scenarios we will have a totally different outcomes or results or a different picture of the future. So the first scenario is recognition of the country by international community and globally. So in this case, I'm quite sure and confident that the banks will boost and they will even perform much better because they gained lots of experience. They have gone through lots of changes, and in certain areas it was not comparable to other scenarios which we had around the globe. And the second scenario is imposing new and decisive sanctions on the country, which will obviously have a bad impact on provision of financial services. And the third scenario could be stopping humanitarian aid to the country. So under this scenario, we will obviously have a different picture, and we can say that the future of financial provisioning of financial services will be different under this scenario.
Great, thanks very much for that. And that concludes the presentation by Matiullah. I want to thank you, Matiullah, for taking the time and effort, although you couldn't be here this time, to give us an insight to Afghanistan. I think we all, whether we be academics in Bangor University, whether we be banking representatives from other parts of the world, we have a much clearer indication of banking in Afghanistan, the challenges it faces. Some of them are the same, some of them are different, but we wish you well, and we'll look forward to continuing to hear how things go. We look forward to seeing you here in Bangor on another occasion. Thank you so much for your time. There's nobody else here to applaud you, so I will do the applauding. Thank you so much, Matiullah. See you again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It was a pleasure attending the conference, and thank you from Bangor University and the team for providing me the chance to speak. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.